Americans have lost trust in their institutions. In fact, it's more than that. They're turning on them. How did this happen? How did we get to a point where Americans are now questioning and turning on their critical institutions that have operated and ran this country over the last 200 years? In this video, I'm going to walk through a few of these institutions so we can see the correlation and why this is bigger than just one of them. In fact, it's a systemic problem across the country. Most Americans don't even know why, but they're pissed. The institutions we're going to cover, like school system and the healthcare system, as well as news, media, let alone our own government, you will see over the last 100 years how these institutions have changed and why we have become so dissatisfied with them and what is the driving cause. Let's start with the one that every American is introduced to at a very early age. In fact, it's probably the first institution that we are all a part of, and that's the school system. It's no secret. America has been falling in the ranks of education across the world every year for the past few decades. We are performing less and less on a national stage in the education realm. In fact, we have gone downhill ever since the Federal Department of Education was created. Now, how could that be? Why is our education falling on a national stage? Why are we less educated? Why are the results so bad? Not to mention that, why have the costs exploded? Think about higher education. Yes, we know there's been inflation, but as you can see here, college tuition has outpaced inflation by leaps and bounds. Since 1985, college tuition has gone up basically 500%, but that's on average. Most colleges are even higher than that, while general inflation only rose just over 100% during that same time. But it's not just the colleges. The public school system's costs have increased astronomically, while at the exact same time, the results have plummeted. But how can you give something more resources, acknowledge there's a problem, and know how to fix it, and still do worse? This is a classical problem, especially in empires like the United States. After it's gone through robust growth, it has lots and lots of money. It has expanded rapidly. The GDP has grown, and the institutions are not only being effective, but they're being very profitable. When you have limited resources, you're nimble and results-oriented. But as they grew, so did the nature of the institution itself. In fact, the institution becomes less about the individual, the customer, or the output, and the institution itself. Take a look at this. We'll go back just to 2000. If we look at the increase of actual teachers, since 2000, teachers have only grown by 5%, while administrative staff has grown by almost 100%. Principals and assistants have grown at 40%, while principals alone have only grown at 10%. Now, how do children learn? They learn through the materials, the courses, but the people that teach. The teachers are the foundation of the education model. They're outrageously valuable, but today, teachers are strapped. There have been piled more and more kids with less resources, all while the institution of education, the administrative staff, and the actual functioning body of it has exploded in growth, leaving the kids and the teachers behind. Let's go back even further. Go back to 1950. This really illustrates the problem. because student body, meaning the amount of students, has grown by 96%. That's not even a 100% increase. During that time, the administrative staff grew by 700%, over 7 times the growth of students, the people that you are actually serving. Resources are being sucked up in administrative bureaucracy and not allocated to the instructors nor the pupils. So of course, we see a negative correlation to increase in funds and performance because the capital, the resources do not go to them. Let's take a look at one of the institutions that has been a problem in the United States for decades, one with severe consequences, the healthcare system. Now, the United States is unique. Why? Because the actual quality of healthcare is really good. You just can't access it or afford it. And Americans are in a complex system in which they don't understand between the government, insurance companies, and the healthcare providers. But one thing's for sure to everyone: costs have exploded. Once again, looking at the exact same metrics as we did the other institutions, let's take a look at administration. Since 1975, healthcare administration has grown at over 3,000%, while doctors, the actual physicians that treat the patients, has grown less than 400%. You can see how this administration after 1990 exploded, also correlating with the rapid rise in cost. Meanwhile, the overall physicians and doctors did not see this kind of increase. So the people that actually treat the patients, we did not see the growth. Well, all right, maybe that makes us more efficient. Well, that's a great question. Let's take a look at the cost of that administration, and let's compare that to other countries. As you see here, the United States cost per capita is over $1,000 in administration cost alone. The next highest is only 30% of that, at $300, with the vast majority of countries costing less than $200. Now, this is important. This is not insurance companies. This is the actual healthcare system. The healthcare system costs have exploded. Insurance companies are their own beast and have their own problems. At the end of the day, you can't charge less than what it costs to make it. So if healthcare cost in the United States multiples times what other countries cost, we are limited at how low those services can be provided, whether it's by private insurance or taxpayers or anyone else. The healthcare that is provided to you when you go to a doctor or a hospital is multiple times that of any other country. Once again, the output, making people healthier and better, that is done through mainly the physicians. They are the ones that are treating, they are the ones that are prescribing and helping patients. And that has grown at a fraction of what the administration has. While that has grown at over 3,000%, our physicians have grown less than 300% since 1975. And what does that output look like? Well, let's go back to 1975. As you can see, at 1975, our life expectancy and health expenditure correlated with every other country. In fact, we correlated with them right up to the beginning of the 80s. We started to diverge and diverged up until 1990. After 1990, we completely went away from the pack. While the rest of the world's cost increased only fractionally, the United States increased exponentially, while our life expectancy did not. Other countries' life expectancy rose dramatically in compared to ours. Ours stayed the same while our cost rose dramatically in compared to theirs. Let's go back and look again, the 1970s to the 1990s. As you can see, from 1975 to 1990, once again, our administration growth grew. But after 1990, it exploded at the exact same time that we separated from the rest of the world and then completely went off the rails. Now, I know cost and output is only one of the reasons that we've lost trust in our institutions. And I'm getting to the second reason. But first,
right now, financing for real estate is really hard, even for self-storage. The markets are very challenging. Live Oak Bank is a specialist in financing for self-storage, including SBA loans. They are one of the leaders in financing all sorts of deals and deal size. We trust Live Oak Bank for their specialty in self-storage, their unique approach, and how they help their customers go through the process so there's no surprises. That in itself is a testament to their exceptional service and support. So whether you're looking to acquire, build, or expand a storage facility, Live Oak Bank has to be number one on your list to call. Click the link below right now so you can experience the difference that a dedicated self-storage partner can really make.
Let's take a simpler one. For example, homes. Comparing two states that have taken wildly different directions. On one hand, we can look at the median home price, California compared to Texas. As you can see, Texas homes have risen since the 1950s, where they were the same price as California. But the rise is very much correlated to things like normal inflation. While California in the 1970s exploded in cost, passing Texas. That got even worse in the 2000s, and now the median home price in California is well over $800,000, while in Texas, it's under $200,000. Now, you may say things like population, but Texas population growth has vastly outpaced California's in the last decade or two. Yet, there was not a corresponding increase in housing prices. Now, let's take a look at the regulations per home in California versus Texas. Once again, we see the exact same chart. Texas regulations increase at a nominal percentage over time, while California exploded with almost 70 regulations per home. Texas maintained only 20. Now, to really look at this first point on how Americans have lost trust in their institutions, which is they no longer serve the individual. Instead, they serve themselves. We have to look at the granddaddy of all of them. After all, Americans trust our government less than we ever have before. So the first chart we're going to look at is big government. The US government expenditures as a percentage of GDP. Basically, how much of the economy makes up the government spending. As you can see, up until the 1930s, that remained under 10% and basically flat outside spikes from wars. After the 1930s, that dramatically increased up until the late 60s, where it reached 30% of GDP. From there, it exploded all the way to 54% of GDP. During COVID, it dropped back down, but is still at 44%, almost 50% of the economy. We need to put this in perspective. Take a look at this chart right here. It took the US 221 years for the total debt to reach $12 trillion. The US added $12 trillion in debt since 2020. They did in 4 years what it took over 220 years prior. But it's just not the money they're spending, our money, or the debt that they're piling up that we have to pay. The complexity is wild. Like we saw in the percentage of GDP, we saw complexity rise, but after the 1960s, it really blew up. Take a look at the total pages published in the Code of Federal Regulations. What was maintained low and slow exploded after the 1960s and really went off the rails after the 1980s. An ever-accumulation of mounting regulation. This is explained even better by this chart. The tax complexity. Up until 1930, flat. Once we hit the 1970s or the end of the 1960s, what did we see? An absolute explosion at multiple times what it previously was. Now, here's the thing about regulation and complexity. That helps the biggest in the economy. Corporations benefit from regulation and tax complexity. In fact, small businesses and individuals bear the vast burden. As regulation increases, small businesses decrease and corporations get bigger because the impact of taxes and regulations is less on corporations. They actually become more profitable. They have more resources to handle it. They have attorneys, and the complexity benefits them because they can find and use all the loopholes, while small business and everyday citizens cannot afford attorneys and CPAs to play the game in a system like this. Meanwhile, your taxes are increasing. Take a look at the federal revenue. Up until the 1940s, it had basically been flat. In fact, there was no income tax or payroll tax. That all changed. And today, income tax equals about 10%, while payroll tax equals about 15%, and then tariffs equal just over that. Meaning the federal revenue is dominated by taxing our income. Once again, the correlation is as the institution of government grew more and more and more, took up more of the economy, implemented more regulation, the less correlated they were with outcomes of individuals. We do not feel the benefit of those taxes and regulations. In fact, they hurt us, and they help only the top in society. They only help the biggest corporations and wealthiest people. This is called protectionism, and the United States is in a protectionist cycle. This benefits the institution itself, and the institution is more concerned about itself than it is the people that they serve. As we've seen in the United States, this has happened in most of our government ran, but lots of institutions. Americans no longer not only get the benefit, but we are actually hurt by the very institutions like healthcare, government, and school systems that are supposed to protect and help us. But that's just one side. The next side of why Americans have lost faith in their institutions has to do with the fact that they are weaponized and politicized. Why? To protect themselves. It's no secret, as we can see with this chart, that public trust in the government is at historic lows. But this distrust has also hit other institutions that have fallen out of favor and because of it are struggling, like news organizations. Time and time again, the media has been caught not only lying, but engaging in protectionist activities where they are protecting the institutions at the expense of individuals with fair, transparent news. We can see this alone in political contributions, where 95% of journalists contribute to the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. Now, this isn't whether Democrats or Republicans are good, no, but it shows how imbalanced it is and doesn't represent the actual people and the people that they are supposed to be informing. Instead, they are telling, pushing ideology instead of facts. This has happened within colleges, where, as you can see here, are basically one-sided. The actual place that is supposed to have a vibrant thought experiment and challenge ideas, that has basically died in America, where virtually all departments are over 94% Democrats. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this happens with Republicans too, in other institutions. They just tend to be more in the private sector. The problem with it is we don't trust the source. A lot of people were shocked by Trump and the Republicans' victory, unsure of how that happened. How did everyone miss it? Not only, why was it such a landslide? I don't think it was necessarily because anyone liked or loved Trump. This was a rebuke of the institutions, the systems themselves. A perfect example of this is this chart. As you can see, once Trump decided to run for election, there's a direct correlation with criticism from the Democratic Party and alignment with news outlets. It is also directly correlated with government lawsuits against him. Once again, this doesn't matter if you like Trump or hate him. What it is lawfare, or it is the institutions that are attacking and trying to create a reality as opposed to serving the people. So the people become more of a populist movement to revolt against the system. You may hate Trump, a lot of people do, but the institutions turned him into some kind of a hero. Why? Because they attacked him, and he made it look like he was standing up for the little guy. Whether you believe that or not, that was the perception amongst lots of people. And in fact, people that didn't like him, they wanted him in office to destroy the system. Now, this changes over time. In fact, Republicans used to be in this category. The perfect example is Bush. You see, Bush, he used the government to do things that we don't think he should have ever done. He increased the power within the presidency, and he used fear and other things to justify the motives of the institution, i.e. the government. Republicans used to be more of the institution that was in protectionism with the private sector. They were not necessarily for the common man. That was the Democratic Party. They were the party of the people. Both parties do this. This isn't political. It is about the institution itself. And depending on who's in power, will use that power. And that's the point. Once the institutions get to a certain size, people feel like they can't control them or have no say. Not only that, the institutions put the institutions first at all cost, especially ours. Whether you are Democrat, Republican, or anything else, because it's not political, Americans vastly agree with this. We've all lost faith in our most fundamental institutions. Today they serve themselves. Now, this is a hard road to come back from. These are the institutions that actually make the laws, that build the infrastructure, that create a self-serving cycle. It takes extremely strong movements, populist movements, and noise until they feel threatened. This can result in terrible things. Perfect example is what we have seen of late in the healthcare system and the targeting of a CEO of an insurance company. When people feel that they have no options, they result into violence. This is exactly what we want to avoid, but you can't unless we hold these institutions accountable. They're too big, they're too bloated, they take too much money, and the outputs are no longer correlated with the inputs. We don't trust the news, we don't believe politicians serve us, we don't believe the healthcare system will help us, and the educational system won't educate us. These are just a handful that will continue throughout other industries and institutions that we all know and see of. So my question is, what institutions can you think of that are now self-serving and have completely diverged from their core purpose to serve themselves?